So hands up who identifies as a junior dev. Don't be ashamed, like own it if you do, okay? So I figure if you're not a junior dev and you're probably a sociopath, I can't think of any other reason for coming along. That's quite revealing. So I have a couple of colleagues in the audience who are not juniors, so therefore I know they're sociopaths. So before we start, big thanks again to all the sponsors, to the blue shirts who are volunteering their time, to the people who've made this event such a great experience. And thank you doubly so for everyone who's come along to listen to me talk and listen to me ramble about people. Actually, types of people. More specifically still, types of people that if you are a junior dev, or even if you're not, you're very likely to encounter as you go through your IT career. And these types of people who, more likely than not, have the ability, the very legitimate ability to make your time in your IT career far less pleasant and far less enjoyable than you deserve it to be. These are our IT sociopaths. Now, before I get to those sociopaths themselves, I was planning a big long spiel about how everyone basically is individual, but if you saw the opening keynote today by Tanya, she did a much better job than I was going to. Okay, so and that's great, it is great, like it's what makes life worth living, the fact that we are all our own little snowflakes. But I care less about that for the next 20 minutes, and I care more about the commonalities. I care more about the common characteristics and behaviours which bind us. I don't want to consider people at that level of fidelity. I want to do what software engineers do, and I want to abstract. And I want to kind of focus on a few core details, because then a lot of that individuality just becomes noise and we start to focus in on common types, which is what I'm going to talk about today. Now, there's 6 types I'm going to introduce you to, 6 of my sociopathic types. I've invented names for these, which I hope are reasonably applicable, but all the actual experiences, all the tales I'm going to relate, all the behaviours that I'm going to associate with those types have absolutely come from the pages of real life. Specifically, my time as an IT consultant. So I've been in consulting for about 20 years, give or take, primarily in Australia, primarily with big organisations. I spend a lot of time in corporates, but I suspect that whether your experience is in a similar sort of IT field to mine, or whether you're in academia, or in the startup world, or in other parts of private industry or government, you'll probably still have a very good chance of running across some of the same types of people. And it's important. It's important to recognise these things. It can be very difficult to understand when you start to get into situations at work, because IT technology is still a very socially based activity, where you're having all these problems with this type of person because they keep behaving that way. It can be very difficult to try and solve those problems if you think that it's a completely unique experience, that it's just you and it's just them. So I'm hoping to give some information between now and the end of the talk about helping you identify that some of the behaviours that you might see are actually far more common than you think, because I've certainly come across them many times over my career. Beyond that, I also would like to give you the beginnings of a bit of a toolkit of how to deal with these situations as well. So I'm going to introduce you to 6 types, as I said, and I'm very deliberate in the order of which I'm introducing them as well. Okay, so this is basically a tale of sociopathy as we go from left to right. I'm going to start on the left-hand side with people who are probably going to be nothing more than minor irritations to you as you go through particular roles, particular jobs, particular organisations. And I'm going to move through into demonstrations and behaviours and characteristics which get far more severe and far more impactful as we get further up into the right-hand side. Okay, so I'm going to start easy and I'm going to kind of ratchet it up from then on. But enough of the abstract, let's get to some real ones here. And I'd like to introduce you to contestant number 1, or as I like to refer to them as, the survivor. So like the mountains and the sun and the stars and the skies, the survivor has been at the organisation long before you came around. They will continue to be at the organisation long after you've gone. Their principal characteristic is that they are patient. They are playing the long game. They have seen the organisation change in so many ways over that time. They've seen changes in leadership. They've seen changes in strategic direction. They've seen changes in structure. They've seen so many technology changes kind of wash up on the shore of the organisation, and the vast majority of them have just kind of flowed back into the ocean again, with really no residual evidence that anything actually changed. They've been through all this. They've seen all this happen. They have a lot of context because they've been there for a long time. They know all the things, they've seen the projects that have survived, they've seen the ones that have failed, they've seen how the organisation has changed over time. But they're not using that knowledge and that power for political gain. They're not looking for a C-level role within this organisation. If they were, they would have moved jobs, because the best way to move up that corporate ladder is to switch jobs, not to stay in one place. But they do have a fair amount of influence because they know all the stuff. If you want to know why this system started breaking, talking to that system when no one has changed the code for the last 12 months or 2 years or so, you go and ask the survivor, because they've probably seen the example of that thing before. If you are there to introduce change into an organisation, you do not want the survivors on your team. Okay, these people are energy sucks. They have no desire to help things change. Okay. They are nice to have on the outer orbit of the work that you're doing, so you can draw on their context and their experience, but you don't want them in that inner sanctum, because that's not the game they play. That's certainly not their bag. All right, let's say goodbye to the survivor and move on to the next one, who is the shiny new object fetishist, which is a bit of a mouthful, I admit, so I'm happy for you to say snoff instead. And like a word which sounds like snoff, just as moths are attracted to bright lights, the snoff is attracted to the allure of uncharted territory from a technology point of view. Their dopamine hit in their job is to go and stand on the vanguard of new technology and be the first to spot something, the first to understand something, the first to work out whether something is going to work for them. That is what they do. That is their primary purpose within the organisation. Classically speaking, they're probably very good engineers because they spend a lot of time playing with technology and understanding technology where there's possibly not a lot of other supporting information to help them. So that muscle that they flex, that mental muscle that they flex about trying to work out how does this new technology fit, how does it fit into what I already know, is something that they practice again and again and again. So they're probably very strong engineers. They probably have a very good public profile showing all the stuff that they are up to, all the spikes and the prototypes that they are doing, okay, which is all good. The downside, because they're a sociopath of some degree, is that they have the attention span of a 2-year-old, which means that no sooner have they got a good grasp on blockchain or the latest AI or ML framework, for example, or the JavaScript framework of today as opposed to tomorrow, as opposed to yesterday, then they've dropped that like a hot potato and moved on to the next thing. And unfortunately, our industry satisfies that urge of theirs so readily because we keep producing new stuff at such a rate of change. There are always shiny new objects for the snoffs to have a look at. Under no circumstances do you want a snoff involved in the decision-making process for technology at your organisation. It's one thing to plant your flag on the mountain of that new tech and say, I was here first, I discovered this. It's another thing entirely to make a decision about a prolonged investment into that technology and therefore having to deal with the consequences. The snoff is all about the former and nothing at all about the latter. So beware of those people. Okay, and they had none of the pragmatism involved in that decision-making process. So, next one, contestant number 3, the post-technologist. And specifically, I'm talking about reluctant post-technologists here. Now, where I work, if you're an engineer, being accused of being post-technical is possibly the worst insult you could ever level at another employee at my company. What I'm talking about here is people who were at one point in their career, possibly for a prolonged period of time, actively involved in using technology, creating things with technology as part of their job. That's what they did. That was their primary thing. But for some reason, good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't really matter in this context, their career has kind of taken a bit of a tangent. It's shifted direction. They've got off that path. They would be off the tools, which is the term that my clients often use to describe these people, and they've gone in a different direction. They've possibly gone on to the management path. They might be some form of architect now. They could be a scrum master. They could be a delivery lead. They are no longer actively involved with using technical tools for creative purposes. And for this particular type, they regret that decision. Maybe not all the time, but certainly times, because they are now dealing with a whole different class of problems that they never had to worry about when they were an engineer. Problems that are probably harder to classify and harder to deal with on a regular basis. They are also, unfortunately, probably getting to the point where their memory of what it was like to actually grind out a job as an engineer is starting to fade. those rose-coloured glasses are starting to slide ever so carefully over their eyes. And that kind of grimy, gritty, dirty work that is required to bend technology to what you need it to do is largely forgotten to them. To them, it's as simple as looking at Hello World tutorials. Don't ever do work that has been estimated by one of these people. If they think it's a 3, it's probably more likely a 30. They have forgotten that all the knowledge that they built up over their time as an engineer is rapidly becoming less and less relevant to people who are currently doing engineering. All the fundamentals they've learned, still there, that knowledge will be eternal, but a lot of the more recent stuff, I mean, things change so quickly in technology, we all know this. For them, web dev could be Angular 1X. For them, when they talk about AWS, they could just be thinking S3 and EC2, which were the first 2 main services that Amazon released. For them, dev and ops might be separate terms, as opposed to one term now. A lot of that stuff has moved on, they may not be aware of that. Okay, 3 down, 3 to go. And we're about to cross an invisible boundary. We're about to go from one country to another, which is not particularly well signposted at the border. And the sociopaths that we've met so far are minor grade players in terms of the amount of impact they can have on your organisation. The next 3 are the big hitters. The next 3 are the ones that can have very significant, in this context, negative impacts on your life as a junior developer. And we're going to start with one with a slightly ironic name of the hero. Now, I was brought up in a Western culture and in Western media, film, book, story, TV, the hero is the good person. Truth, justice and the American way, or whatever nationality they're from. Enormous amounts of bravery, courage, fighting against insurmountable odds, and in the final reel of the film or the final chapter of the book, they make it. They survive through enormous amounts of commitment and energy on their behalf. And the notion of the hero in this particular context is very, very similar. The only difference is no sane person working in IT ever wants to be in a situation where you need to exhibit insane amounts of bravery, courage, and physical personal effort to get stuff done. That's just crazy. These people are going to be visibly the first people in the office in the morning. They're going to be visibly one of the last to leave in the day. They will be getting emails from their team leaders because they stayed at 3 o'clock to sort out a customer issue. They'll be the ones who worked all weekend to get a release over the line. They might even actually get physical plexiglass awards from their organisation for going above and beyond the call of duty. Unfortunately, they are generally really, really poor engineers. If they were good engineers, they would have found a solution to those problems that doesn't require them to work that much. Good engineers solve problems with technology, so we don't need to invest so much of our own personal time into the solution. They also have very high degrees of cultural alignment. Now, what the hell does that mean? Well, I'm not going to tell you, but I will give you a bit of a teaser. That same thing is going to apply for my next 2 types as well, and I will come back to it at the end of the talk. Okay. So, we'll say farewell to our hero, and we'll move on to our next one. The complexity junkie. Now, don't be fooled by the slightly flippant name here. These people are toxic, toxic, toxic people to have around your organisation. More so than any of the other types I've talked about, they are probably intellectually the best in terms of their ability to be able to cram into their minds incredibly complex architectures, solutions, algorithm designs, call them what you will. If you're working with one of these people, you will be astounded by how much of a complex mental model they can grapple within their mind. Unfortunately, they use that power for basically evil rather than good. Because whereas a truly astonishing engineer will try and make something which is very complex, very simple, the complexity junkie is going to want to try and amplify that. Because they're in a game, and that game has only one ending, and that ending is when they and only them are the people who can understand what's going on. And they will continue to add complexity. They'll continue to add layers of abstraction, indirection, extra tooling until everyone else in the team around them just falls by the intellectual wayside and they stand alone as being the only person who knows what the hell is going on. Again, very well culturally aligned, but it's all about ego for them. And if you're working in a team with these people, it is a horribly dispiriting process to go through. to see someone work in that particular style. And again, I've seen lots of examples of this over the years. 5 down, 1 to go. Now the last one, I must admit, I've cheated a little bit because the last one is not a particularly IT-centric sociopathic type, but they do occur in many organisations and many parts of organisations, and I have seen this type in IT quite a lot. And the last one is the good old-fashioned common or garden variety, vanilla corporate bully. Okay. Now, they tend to flourish in big organisations. They tend to flourish in organisations which have a fairly obvious command and control sort of environment, where the people at the top give the instructions to be executed by the people down the bottom, and the people down the bottom expect to be given instructions by people at the top. These bullies normally rise to fairly significant levels of influence. They'll have titles and budgets and possibly a nice corner office, lots of people reporting to them. They'll have lots of status symbols. They will have, along with that organisational power, amassed an incredible set of interpersonal skills that will make them extremely difficult to deal with in a one-on-one or group situation. They will speak loudly, they will speak quickly, they will cut you off, they will belittle you, they will do anything they can, including a combination of just enough buzzwords and bravado to make you think they actually know what they're talking about from a technical point of view, but they are incredibly skilled at winning those generally in-person, one-on-one and group conversations. And hopefully, fingers crossed, they will not see you and your progression through your career and your ambitions as being a threat to them, because that's when things get very, very, very nasty. They have very little empathy for anyone else. A little bit like the complexity junkie, for them this is all a game, and the game is a zero-sum game, which means for them to win, you have to lose. All right, so that's the end of my 6 types. And I think I've only delivered on half of my promise at the start, which is to introduce you to those types and try and establish some of the common behaviours that I've seen, again, exhibited so many times throughout my career. The other part of that is, what can you do about it? If you find yourself in that situation, if you find one of these types coming around the corner, like literally in a corridor sense, or you can see you're going to be working on a project with them, for example, what do you do? Particularly if you're early on in your career and you may not have experienced this sort of stuff before. Well, at times like this, I like to turn to prayer, specifically this prayer. Now, I didn't actually know this was called a prayer until I was doing research for this presentation. I knew the quote. I didn't know it was called the Serenity Prayer, but I do like it. It's not a silver bullet. There are no silver bullets in this situation. But if you're particularly offended that something quasi-religious has been introduced into a presentation in a technical conference, then close your eyes and I'll take away the Serenity Prayer and I'll give you the Serenity Flowchart, which is really exactly the same sentiment, just expressed in a notation you're probably going to be a bit more comfortable with. And the idea is very simple. Work out, can you change the situation you're in? And then, if you can, summon the courage and make the change, or summon the level of calmness you need to accept the situation you're in. Now, on a case-by-case basis, that yes-no is going to vary for each person and each situation they're in, but I do like the really pragmatic nature that it talks about this. Whether you choose the serenity and accept or the courage and change path, the next bit of advice is the most important thing to focus on, and the next bit of advice is the hardest thing to do. It's only 3 words. They are 3 very easy words to write, 3 very easy words to read, 3 incredibly difficult things to master. Which is, you need to put yourselves in the shoes of the person who is causing you all this angst. Someone who might be literally making it really difficult for you to get out of bed in the morning and come to work. They could be generating feelings of anxiety, possibly depression, anger, frustration, all that sort of stuff. You need to assume that what they are doing is because they think it's the right thing to do. You need to understand what the context that they are working in that makes their behaviour make sense. If you can't get beyond that, you're going to struggle to either change what's going on or even to get the level of serenity to accept what's happening. Okay. Something that can help is, again, move away from this notion of types, which I've been talking about, and get back to the fact that they're a human being. That your interactions with them during the working environment, during 9 to 5, whatever your time is not the complete picture of what they are. They're a human being, they have other relationships outside of work, they have family, they have friends, they have hobbies, they have pets, they do things which give them satisfaction. They are far more than just the negative feelings that they are generating when they're working with you. And if you spend too much time labeling them with pejorative terms, terms which are negatively associated, you forget the fact that for each of those people, there is a flip side. There's like a through the looking glass view, where in some cases exactly the same behaviour can be displayed and can be represented in a positive way. Each of those types, with the possible exception of the bully, because I just can't find my way to justify a lot of that behaviour, each of those other 5 types have valuable things that they bring to an organisation. Okay, one final very quick point is, in most cases, especially with heroes and the complexity junkies and the bullies, it's because the organisation wants them to behave that way. The organisation that they are working in, the culture that they are working in, not only tolerates their behaviour, but actually accepts and promotes and enables it. Company culture is a very difficult thing to get a handle on. I like this quote from Netflix. Basically what it's saying is it's not what's on the posters, it's not what's on the t-shirts or on the website, it's what you see exhibited within the company. It's the people and behaviours that get promoted and rewarded, and likewise it's the people and the behaviours that get demoted and pushed out of the organisation. That's the most honest perspective of organisational culture that I can think of. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that if you are trying to fight a situation or change a situation with heroes and bullies and complexity junkies involved, you have possibly a much bigger task than I originally set out. And I would love to be able to answer and give you a whole bunch of tips about the best way to deal with that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to leave that kind of hanging in the air. 1, because I've run out of time, and 2, because the next presentation is going to touch on some of the same ground as well, and I think do a far better job than I ever would have. So, thank you for your time. I hope you got something out of this. I'm happy to have maybe time for questions now. If not, I'll be around for the rest of the day. Thanks for coming along.